Hello everybody and welcome back to Chris Bosch Props. I know it's been a long time since I've talked about my Scratchbuilt Proton Pack shell that I did about a year ago. It was kind of like I did it and then I fell off the face of the planet and never talked about it again and moved on to other things. Anyway, I thought I would do a video with you guys kind of showing you the backstory of how I built it. Unfortunately, during the build, I kept referencing and saying that I was using a screen use shell to help build this Scratchbuilt shell, but I was never able to actually show physically the screen use shell I was using. So some of you probably thought I was just making it up or it was just hogwash. So it wasn't hogwash, guys. I have the screen use shell or a cast from the mold of a screen use shell here, and I kind of wanted to do a comparison video showing you guys some of the details that I was able to capture on my new Scratchbuilt shell here. And I do plan on selling a few or doing a small run of them. So I kind of wanted to show you guys in detail what you will be getting if you do decide to buy my shell. But nonetheless, this was a passion project of mine and I really just want to show it off in better detail. I got a better camera to pick up a lot of the detail that I did, and I hope you guys enjoy it. So let's get into it. Okay guys, so here we have my Scratchbuilt Hero shell replica next to a screen use shell that was worn by the original actors in the original 1984 Ghostbusters film. Now this isn't a shell out of the original mold, but this was a mold that was done by some fans that were able to get the license to sell these shells, and this is a casting from that particular mold. And so here we have it. When I originally started this shell build of mine, I didn't have a physical screen use shell with me. All I had was paper plans, and I built quite a bit of the shell with the paper plans, and the paper plans were probably as good as you were going to get if someone were to come in here and kind of idealize some of the measurements. But there was a lot of blanks because there's so much wonkiness and awkwardness when it comes to this screen use shell. And what I mean by wonkiness is that there is not a straight surface on this shell. Everything is angled, guys, everything. So what I mean by there is no straight surfaces, I mean nothing is straight. Look at that. You could see just the wonkiness there. That makes it extremely difficult to get proper measurements as if it were just a straight square. If it was a straight square, I'd be able to build this thing with no problem. I did a shell many years back that some of you are familiar with. This was my first Scratchbuilt shell that I built, and a lot of the boxes on there are more square, so it was a lot easier to build than actually having the screen use shell present because everything is crooked. So you would think I had the cheat code to build my shell because I had this right here. Surely that's easier than using paper plans. No, it's not, because if you're using the paper plans, you just accommodate everything to a straight square box. And there you go. It's not that complicated, but it's very difficult to understand measurements when nothing is straight. I mean, everything on this pack is crooked. You can see, there you go. Nothing really lines up against it. Here, here's the top of the shell. Nothing straight. There's the crank gen. Nothing straight. Here's the sink gen, guys, on the screen use shell. Nothing is straight. There's the bottom portion, nothing is straight. Here's the gun mount, guys. Nothing is straight. So enough about there not being straight surfaces on the original screen use shell. I mean, this thing is just crooked. It's crooked everywhere. You could see there on the EDA how it angles this way. Here I switched around to a different angle. Look how crooked the power cell is on top. Look how crooked the EDA is on top. everything is kind of like this. And then on this side, everything kind of buckles inward. So anyways, that made it very difficult for me to get proper measurements, because what I was trying to do was be able to build my shell to fit within the outline of this Screen Use Hero shell. So this is just a quick trace of the Screen Use Hero shell casting I have here. And let me show you real quick. Okay, so you can see how the Screen Use casting fits within this outline, okay? Now this was just a quick outline done with a Sharpie. And I wanted my shell to be able to fit within the outline of this Screen Use casting. Anyway, because of all the crookedness and wonkiness, it made it very difficult to understand the measurements and compensate everything so that I can get it to fit. It was a battle, it was a fight. I can't really describe it other than it was a battle to try to get the measurements right. But anyway, I was able to achieve it and to accommodate it. So here, I'm gonna show you guys my shell put on. And just so you can see, there's the inside of my shell. It's fiberglassed in some areas just to give some added strength. It's been sitting in the garage for a while, so it's pretty dirty. But yeah, I mean, that's how I built it, with white polystyrene sheets. But anyway, let's put it on the outline here. So here is my shell within the outline, no edits, no cuts. And see how it fits so nicely within the outline of the Screen Use casting. This was extremely difficult, guys. Extremely difficult. Here, I'm sweating. It is hot in Texas, guys. Very hot. So yes, making sure that my shell fits within the Screen Used outline was very important to me. And the hope was that eventually, when Max Factory releases motherboards for his legacy shell, which is a Screen Use casting as well, pretty much the same exact shell, people would be able to purchase a motherboard from him and use it on my shell. But also, it was just something that I was proud of to be able to replicate, and it was challenging, and I always like a challenge. This shell was way harder to build than my original shell because of how awkward this shell is. It's much harder to replicate it with it here than using just paper plans or assumptions. So enough about that. I want to compare some details. I'm just going to kind of walk through each piece and we can compare side to side and see how it looks. So here is the crank gen. You can see this taper and these lines underneath the crank gen ribs, the bottom rib. You can see this awkwardness in this vac tube here. The crookedness of many of the fins and ribs. Now here's mine. Now this nail mark is not present on this superhero shell, but on the Venkman pack, the nail is present. Now, there are certain markings that are on the Venkman shell that are not present on this superhero shell. So I'm not sure how many molds they did, guys, or how many castings. I don't know why some of the details like that, such as nail marks, are missing, but a lot of them are present on both shells. So it's kind of hard. It's just a mystery. But anyway, on my shell, I went with the Venkman style. Now you can see I also did the crookedness of this crank gen tube here. This was something I wasn't going to do. This is also present on the Venkman pack. And I just had to do it. I wasn't going to, but then I had to. So another detail that is present on the crank gen on the screen use packs is the bottom box is lower than the top box. I also replicated that detail along with a lot of the tapers that are on the corners of the boxes. For instance, guys, there is this taper on the top of the crank gen here underneath the top ribs. I also replicated that. As you can see here, there is the crookedness of the ribs along with the texture, which I'm pretty proud of. I got it pretty close. Now for the gun mount, this was a pain. There's a lot of weird measurements going on this, and it's crooked. And so the measurement's different here than the measurement is at the top here, and it's tapered this way, it's tapered on the bottom. It was extremely difficult to replicate that, but I am very proud of my gun mount. I was able to replicate it much better than my original. And the rounded edges that I did, if you could see it there, you can also see that it is present on mine. I hope it picks it up. It looks quite dark in the picture. So here is the side of the gun mount, and you can see the taper present on both sides. And there is mine with the various nail marks that are on it. Now I did not replicate the taper to the EDA. I just didn't like it. So I did mine much more square. And not as exaggerated. It's there slightly, but I did not exaggerate it as much as the screen use shell. Same thing with the power cell. Yeah, I wanted that just a little bit more square on top. I didn't go that route there. Some things you won't notice, but this clippered spacer here is much more egg-shaped, and it has kind of like a scrape or a bite that's on top of it. I replicated that on my shell. It is also present on the screen use shell. There are these mold, or like these seam lines from the wood being stacked. Now some people believe these were made of foam. I don't believe they were made of foam. I believe they were made of stacked wood, plywood, MDF of some sort. Just because of the nail marks. I mean, why are you going to nail into foam? On mine, I also replicated some of those seams there. And also that seam line on the cyclotron that's on the screen use shell, I also replicated that. You can see it there. I replicated it as well. Now there's a lot of wonkiness, like not a single one of these spaces is really the same. I mean, they vary because there's a lip, so it's flat here, but then there's a lip that comes up on this edge here that makes this thicker. So I didn't want to go through each one and have a lip that sat up that high. So I decided to go with a neutral spacing for all of those, but still kind of keep some of the wonkiness. If that makes any sense. I know it probably doesn't, but I did still try to keep a lot of that wonkiness that's present on that bottom sync gen. All of the cyclotron rings are properly spaced, The cyclotron holes are actually a lot wider on this particular shell. I decided to opt with the Venkman holes, which are just slightly smaller. Indentations that I kind of added on the clipboard that are present on this one. If you could see it, there's some indentation. I didn't exaggerate it as much, but it is present on mine. One thing I'm proud of also is my EDA. I have the exact size of the disc. I like the nipple detail that I was able to achieve. There's the screen used. Here is the power cell. Here is the power cell on mine. Now I went with the window that matches the Venkman pack. This window is for this particular shell, which is a little bit wider and just slightly different. There's also this little hidden detail right here, guys, which I'm gonna try to get, where when they put this together, what I think they did is they used some Bondo that they scraped like this, and it created this lip here, and then they put this little square, this spacer square, to accommodate, so when they put the injectors on, they would sit more flush. So that's my theory, but I did replicate this Bondo seam like that, as you can see there. On the Venkman pack, that square is not present. This probably wasn't even on this original shell. It was probably added in post-production, is my guess. But it's not on the Venkman pack. So I left it off for my particular mold, but I did 3D print in the intro. You saw something fall off. That's what this was. I just replicated this, 3D modeled it. This will come with my shell in case the person wants to replicate this particular shell. That was a detail that I really did want to replicate. There's also this part on the power cell. I'm gonna see if the camera can pick it up, but it's kind of crooked, and then there's this little taper there. Tried to replicate that and have that little taper there and the angle on the top, along with the ugliness. You can see the roundness of that edge. And then on the screen used, it's also there. Yeah, it was very important to replicate a lot of those round edges like that. Did the same on mine, all of that. I really wanted to replicate that. This round part right here kind of has a sharp edge on it. I also kind of replicated that sharp edge there. The roundness of those edges. Very important stuff for me, guys. The most important thing to me, besides all the measurements, was the texture. Now, if you can see the texture there, it's very subtle, unless it's hit with like certain angles of lighting, and it really brings out the texture. I really wanted to replicate it very closely. This is a combination of a couple methods, but it's very subtle, it's very smooth. And I think I got it pretty close. You can see in certain lightings that texture. But then there's very little texture on this part of the sync gen. But on the cyclotron, you can see that it's present. But here it's very smooth with paintbrush strokes and marks, which I tried to also kind of simulate. There are some markings that are present on the EDA, like right here on the screen used, right here, that I also somewhat replicated on mine. I'm trying to get some better lighting. And there it is. There is some markings right there inside of the sync gen that I also tried to do on mine. If you can see it in there. Very subtle, very subtle. This is the round edge on my shell. Here is the round edge on the screen used. Matched it pretty much perfectly. There was a measurement here that was driving me insane. It's probably stupid to most, but this corner to this edge, it was hard for me to get the angle of this square disc right here that's on top of the sync gen to get it just right to match that measurement, but I was able to get it. And I also have, there's another part there, you could see this detail here that's on the end of this, also on the screen used, and I kind of replicated that. Stupid stuff I probably didn't need to. One thing that I've noticed on a lot of replica shells that they never get right, I didn't get it right on my original shell, is the roundness of the cyclotron edge. Look at the screen used and look how sharp that rounded edge is. It's very, very sharp. You could feel the sharpness. It took a lot of time sculpting it and getting it right, but I do feel that I did achieve it very closely. You're probably asking, why is the infilter plate missing, Chris? Why is it not on your shell? Well, this infilter plate was definitely put on after the fact. So when this was originally casted, this, more than likely, this disc was not there, and also this infilter plate wasn't there. And I say that because it was heavily glued on and it was riveted. There were rivet marks on this plate, and because of the rivets, makes me believe that this wasn't originally on the shell. So I decided to leave it off of mine. Now, I could be wrong in my theory, but I don't think it was originally there. So I did leave it off of my shell. There is some markings that are here with the PPD. I also replicated those there. Here's a rounded edge there that is also present on the screen used. Another detail is this indentation here. I also replicated that indentation on the side. Probably wasn't necessary. I just figured, hey, why not? I'm here. Let's do it. Just a little bit of details here. This little notch. It's also present on this shell. That little notch there. There's the angle of the top crank gen. Here is the angle on the top of my crank gen. Very similar. It was important for me to get a lot of the spacing right on this corner edge and the roundness correct, which I was able to achieve, of course, because I had the screen use shell as reference. So that definitely helped, guys. I can't say that it made it easier, but it definitely helped. This top part right here, that is rounded. You have the nail marks. It's also rounded, and you have the nail marks. So yeah guys, I hope you liked the video. This is just showing you my comparison. I plan to do a small run on GB Fans very soon. Maybe I'll do 7 shells. It could be less guys, I don't know. It's funny, when I made my mold, I did a few private casts for some friends, and I never made a shell for myself, so I'm buying some material to make a shell for myself so I can start getting it built. I'm already collecting parts. This is a screen used booster frame. I have the bumper and a bunch of other stuff I've been collecting. So I need to cast a shell for myself, so I don't want to waste extra material. I'll have extra material, so you know, I'm like, hey, while I'm at it casting a shell for myself, I might as well just do a few to help some of you guys that really do want something that is close to the screen use shell. I'm very, very proud of this. Like I said in my intro, it was a passion project for me. It took me several months to complete this and do this. There was a lot of people that helped me in the process, and I'm very thankful for them. One of them is M. Burkett. If you don't know him, he's on GB Fans, good friend of mine. He was an extreme help, and to be honest, I probably could not have done this without him, at least not this good. So thank you, Mr. Burkett, for all your help. And yeah guys, so that's it, and we are on to the next one.